So, welcome back to the MovieBabble Podcast. This week you've got myself, Colin, and I'm joined by Brennan. Nick is out this week, but how are you doing, Brennan?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, it's been a little bit since it's been just you and me, but it's great to be back on the MovieBabble Podcast again. No Nick. I wonder what he's up to.
But he was rewatching the Snyder Cut. I think this is his second or third time, but well, maybe next week he'll be ready to move on. But yeah, we have some big stuff to talk about. We're starting to get into just kind of the big blockbuster season. Been a minute since we had one of those. So before we jump into new content, I just want to touch on Avatar taking the highest grossing film of all time title back. It had a Chinese release, which has done just astoundingly well. So it only needed just shy of 8 million to take the record back, and it's currently pulled in about 45 million in China these past few weeks. So it is again the world record holder at 2.833 billion, which is pretty impressive. Gives it a pretty good lead on Avengers. I won't be surprised if Endgame gets some re-releases and slowly makes its way up the field again, but Avatar is back on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is an interesting thing because at the end of the day, they're both Disney films now, Disney property, right? Because of that Disney acquisition of Fox. So at the end of the day, it's Disney raking in all the money. But it is very interesting to kind of look at this, like the two biggest movies of all time, technically. And really, I mean, it, like the dynamic here is that both these movies landed really close, right? When Endgame passed Avatar, it was truly because it was just truly razor thin, and you knew this was going to happen at some point. And I think all we're going to see is re-release after re-release, kind of taking these movies back and forth to the number one and number two spots. I think James Cameron's going to probably want to hit 3 billion now. Up at 2.833. I mean, he's got a little bit to go there, but $40 million from a re-release in China that's pretty big. And it's an indicator as well as to how energized the Chinese market is right now in terms of movie watching. And you know what? I think if a re-release is making 45 million in China, I think they're going to be very optimistic about the numbers for Avatar 2 in China. I think that's what that is. Like that, for me, that looks like a great precursor for how that movie could do in China. Like it could do a lot if a re-release is making 45 million. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And there are a lot of people complaining about this, a lot of MCU stands complaining about this, but you got to remember, Endgame overtook Avatar because of a mini re-release with 4 minutes of extra footage, right? Like there was that little cut that came out a few months after that had like a Stan Lee thing and had like some bloopers, had like that unfinished Hulk scene that was like so weird at the end. So these things happen. I mean, some people say you should only count the first run. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I agree with that. I'm good with counting anything that's seen. But yeah, it's interesting, and I think we knew this was going to happen at some point.
Yeah, and I think that is a good thing to note because it's not like Avengers just did this in one go, whereas Avatar was just in theaters for an eternity, and it did actually get a little mini re-release towards the end of its run as well. But those things are pretty natural, and I think the rules are a little bit different if the movie is still in theaters pretty widely. So when Endgame got its re-release, it was still playing in most of the theaters it was returning to. Whereas now with Avatar being in China, this is a movie that hasn't played in theaters for a while, and so now it's coming back, and this is more of a re-release in the traditional sense. But at the end of the day, it's just numbers. Disney's pocketing the money from both of them either way. So, but I do like that James Cameron has the title again. So he's held it, with the exception of last year. He's held highest grossing film for 22 years, since Titanic. And then he took it from himself with Avatar, and now he's got the crown back. So it's kind of cool to see that.
Yeah, for sure. And would you agree? Do you think this is a good sign for them with Avatar 2 potentially in China?
Yeah, I think one of the concerns with Avatar is that people, and Nick and I have talked about this, and I'm sure you've have had similar sentiments, is that Avatar is a movie that it made a ton of money. It really pushed visual effects, but nobody really talks about it in the sense of looking back fondly at it. Even Endgame, you still got the Marvel machine going, and that film is still very much in the conversation. Even this week, I've seen a ton of tweets just throwing it back to the opening night reactions where Captain America grabs the hammer. You don't really see that with Avatar, so I think this proves that Avatar is still something that people want to see. Will that still be the case when Avatar 2 comes out in 45 years? I don't know, but it's a good sign for that franchise.
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. And, I think for me, I'm the person that has the hypothesis that Avatar 2 is going to make a ton of money out of intrigue. And then it's really going to be who knows with the rest of them. But I'm excited to see what happens, as you said, 45 years from now when Avatar 2 finally premieres.
The real winner here is Zoe Saldana, who is winning either way. Like, she's in in the highest grossing movie of all time, whichever one holds the title. So it's cool to see that.
Yeah, she landed some good roles there.
But yeah, that is Avatar. Maybe someday we'll have a pod talking about how Endgame takes it back from having it taken back. But for now, we'll jump into the big one. So this week was the debut of the long-awaited Snyder Cut, or Zack Snyder's Justice League, is it's initially called. And yeah, this movie's here in all its 4-hour and 2-minute glory. So this movie was pretty notoriously changed by WB and by Joss Whedon after Zack Snyder unfortunately had to leave the project to be with his family. It was a very tragic scenario, just what was happening with him personally. And then the movie came out, and there were all sorts of reports coming out in the following months, just talking about how much it changed and how different the vision was. And you can see a lot of ways they were trying to force the DCEU into the MCU style. And so it was rumored for years. Every now and then, like Jason Momoa or Zack Snyder would just like post a picture of a film canister. We like, are you saying it doesn't exist? And then last year they announced it. They said HBO Max Snyder Cut's on its way, and it is here. So is this something that you were looking forward to?
I mean, I think the intrigue of it has to have everyone interested. I haven't really been the biggest in the DCEU. Like, it's not something that I'm like the biggest diehard fan of, but I think they have some good movies here and there. I will be checking this out at some point. I did want to watch some of the older ones first because I think Batman v Superman, I haven't seen it since theaters, and I didn't watch the extended cut that they put out. Man of Steel, I haven't seen since theaters, and Wonder Woman 84, I haven't seen yet because I'm just waiting till that big old price tag of $25 on VOD drops for me, because there's no theaters that I could have checked it out in. So I'm just kind of wanting to watch some of those before I do dive into this 4-hour epic. But yeah, it's something that I'm like, whenever it dropped a few days ago, and just in the days leading up, me as someone who's kind of an impartial bystander to this movement, it was exciting to see people get excited. I think that's the main thing. Like there's so many people on the internet that are just so hyped about this, and people that have watched it multiple times already. I mean, I don't know how you can do that, but it's interesting, and I think it's cool, and it's good for movies. It's good for pop culture. I think it's good. I think it's good in that respect. But if the movie's good, I don't know. I'll have to wait to see. But you watched it, so what did you take away from this?
So interestingly enough, before we jump into Justice League completely, they did not give Armand White a review copy, which is astounding. And for those of you who don't know who Armand White is, he's the critic that took away Toy Story 3's 100% fresh rating back in 2010. He called Man of Steel the godfather of superhero movies. He praised Batman v Superman. He's basically the the antithesis to movie criticism. Like, whatever the industry agrees with, he's the opposite. And it was baffling that they did not reach out to him. Like, he was refused a chance to preview it and put his thoughts in the world beforehand. And so I'm really looking forward to those before I make my final verdict on this movie. I just want to get that out there before we jump in. So I revisited all the DC movies, or the DCEU movies this week as well. Just kind of on that note, I hadn't seen. I think I've seen Justice League once since it came out on Blu-ray and whatnot. I hadn't seen Batman v Superman or Man of Steel in probably 3 years either. So it was like watching a lot of these for the first time again. And what I found is my opinion of Batman v Superman actually went up a little bit, because even though I don't think it comes together at all, I think it's much more ambitious than the Justice League that we got in 2018, or more ambitious than Man of Steel even. And so I'm not a Zack Snyder fan. I'm not really a DCEU fan. The only one that I really like return to is Shazam. Although I did like Aquaman better watching it for the second time, the first time since theaters this past week. And I admittedly I was pretty excited for the Snyder Cut. You know what? It is an event. It's this big thing that we haven't really had anything like this before. You know, this is a 4-hour recut that is the director's vision that quite literally was taken from him by the studio and by another director. So I was excited for that proponent of it. But it's just not very good. um, it's it's good in the sense that it fixes some of the things that we didn't get to see in the original theatrical cut. So the biggest change is that Cyborg is a key player, whereas in the theatrical cut, he's just kind of on the sidelines, adjacent to the action most of the time. And so there are three characters I think that they do a legitimately astoundingly better job with, and that is Cyborg, that is the Flash, and that is Steppenwolf. So Steppenwolf in the theatrical cut just kind of says mother a lot and then punches things. And in this one, he's got a lot more grounding. So you see him just kind of playing off of Darkseid and Desaad and some of the other New God characters. And you get to see him as basically like this kid who just wants to come back home. And everyone's telling him no. And so he's given a much more depth. He's given a cooler design. I don't personally think the CGI really comes off very well on him or on Cyborg, but it still happens. And then Cyborg has much more to do. You get to explore his family relationships a lot more. You get to explore just his motivations a lot more. There's less of an ex machina kind of role. So he's not just showing up whenever the plot calls for it, even though there is still one scene in particular where he just like does something because the plot requires it to, and there's no better way to make things happen. But he's much more grounded. And then the Flash is much less of a wimp. Like in the theatrical cut, he just kind of whines and is like, I just push people and run away. And in this movie, you don't really have that kind of just cowardice. There's still a lot of hesitation there. But he's like a much more stabilized hero. Like he knows he's signed up for the hero gig. And you get to see him use his powers more creatively and more powerfully, and B, just like be a more interesting, grounded character. Like he's actually, you can see where he's coming from more and where he's going to. So those are the things I really, really liked. There are many more things I did not like. So I'll go for the low hanging fruit. That's the aspect ratio. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Yeah, that was funny. I think the day it came out, I saw those pictures start coming out on Twitter. Isn't it like it's the very first shot of the movie or something like that?
Yeah. So my HBO Max viewing didn't have that.
Okay, interesting.
But like you, I'd seen all the memes, or well, I thought they were memes when I saw them. I was like, that can't be real. um, but no, lo and behold, the movie is actually in a 4:3 aspect ratio, which for people at home that don't really care about aspect ratios, 4:3 is typically what like older TV would be in, or even older movies before the dawn of TV might have been in. It was a lot more common then, and you know, I'm not one of those people that gets really caught up in aspect ratios. Um, you know, I think for the most part, it's the director's choice, right? I'm not going to complain because somebody shot their film in this particular style. So I think The Lighthouse was kind of the last big, more popular movie shot in a modern time to really go for that differing aspect ratio. But my issue with Justice League is you can very easily tell that this movie was not shot with this aspect ratio in mind. It comes across as a very late in the editing process decision. So there are a lot of action sequences in particular where the action is cut off from what's actually happening. So you're missing a character's head. Or there's one scene where Hippolyta, Wonder Woman's mom, is holding an arrow on fire, and you can't see the tip of it that's on fire because of the aspect ratio change. And I'm just kind of baffled as why they went with 4:3, because there are aspect ratios that give you that same kind of imposing height, which is supposedly what this was for, to make the characters seem taller, make the action seem larger, and I get that. But most HD TVs, IMAX, which has been kind of the de facto excuse for this, is, oh, he was trying to match the IMAX aspect ratio. Except he's not using the IMAX aspect ratio, which allows for that same height, but also takes full advantage of the width of the width of modern TVs. So that's the 1.9 to 1 aspect ratio. That is much larger, gives you that same imposing height, but still takes advantage of just the natural way our eyes look at things, which is laterally, not vertically. So I'm not sure why they went with 4:3. I don't think it really works. It's really distracting for me watching it on an HD TV when it's, a movie that was clearly not shot for this particular format. So I will just scratch my head at that till the end of time.
Yeah. That was funny though. I just kind of briefly just mentioning that blue screen at that, like what we were seeing on Twitter, essentially, just that line. This film was shot in 4:3 the way Zack Snyder intended it to be, or something like that.
My only guess is that, like, maybe HBO Max was like, well, a lot of people will watch this 4-hour movie on their phones. And so maybe if you hold your phone vertically, it makes sense because then it would fit neatly into the sides. But I don't understand at what point in the process they were like, hey, we need to do it this way. And I would assume it probably had something to do with being able to cut what all they needed to master effects wise, because you're cutting a lot of the action on the side. So you don't have as much to worry about in the background and you can really just focus on the foreground. So I'm wondering if that might be the issue, or if just because they weren't really allowed to reshoot existing sequences, they were like, you know what, we're just going to work around it, drop some black boxes in, cut the sides off, and then go from there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is certainly an interesting decision. Yeah, it's weird. I do want to ask you though, personally. I mean, do you think that, two questions? First one being, do you think that this goes anywhere? Do you think Zack Snyder is able to make more DCU movies? Do you think that this core group of people, despite a Matt Reeves Batman coming, despite talk, or despite Henry Cavill saying like, "Yeah, I'm done," do you think that there is a possibility now that Zack Snyder revives this franchise with this group of people, or do you think this is more of a swan song?
I think this is more of a swan song. I think we really missed the moment for this. Had this come out in 2017, been this hyped up, been this successful, then yeah, maybe. But when this movie originally came out, it made significantly less than anything Marvel put out that year. Justice League topped out in the mid to late 600 millions, which for an ensemble movie featuring the three most popular superheroes of all time to earn 657.9 million, while Thor and Spider-Man Homecoming and whatever the third MCU movie that year was, Guardians, all made over $1 billion. Just prove that people don't really jump towards this kind of thing as much as they do with later movies. And even like Aquaman came out a year later and doubled the earnings of Justice League. And that is one of the frustrating things about the Snyder Cut, is because it sets up a lot. Like after the movie ends, there's about half an hour of just setting up other things, which is where all those reshoots that took place last fall happen, is this big one sequence with all these people sitting on a highway basically, and then talking to each other. So it sets up a lot that we'll never see, which is kind of irritating because there's a lot that very much should have been cut from Justice League. I think if this had been trimmed down to even a 3-hour movie, you could have kept the core elements, which unfortunately for non-Cyborg, Steppenwolf, and the Flash characters haven't really changed at all between cuts. I think you really could have cut this into something worthwhile instead of overpromising on things that won't really happen. But I mean, the creative team behind all these pursuits is kind of gone. Zack Snyder's said he's kind of done. Henry Cavill and Superman are supposedly being rebooted. Ben Affleck is doing the Flash, and then he's out. Michael Keaton's taken over. And unfortunately, I just don't see him as a 75-year-old man being able to perform a lot of the same stunts. So it does very much feel like a swan song in that regard.
Yeah, and I mean it's interesting though to definitely talk about. And the other question though, do you think so? So the fans kind of push for this, and that's why it happened, right? The release the Snyder Cut was just such a big push, and it was smart for them to do it with HBO Max. But do you think this is something that we see happen more often? Fans demanding different cuts and them coming out? I mean, I don't think so personally, but what's your take on that?
I don't think so. I think a lot of what you have going for this is that there is a very devoted fan base to Zack Snyder's DC movies, first off. And then Warner Brothers has also just had ridiculously bad press because everything coming out about Joss Whedon and about the production and about the way WB just kind of took control from Zack Snyder and treated Ray Fisher and just all these problems. I think this was Warner Brothers trying to get back in people's good graces at the same time. And you couple that with kind of the fanatic following that Zack Snyder has. I mean, there's a reason we got the Snyder cut of Justice League and not the Trank cut of Fantastic Four, because you're just dealing with a very, very unique situation. So as cool as it would be to, see the Colin Trevorrow cut of Rise of Skywalker, that's never going to happen. I think this is a one and done kind of situation. And I think it's also something that HBO Max has kind of struggled to pull in subscribers. And I think this is their big play to really turn things around. So I don't necessarily see other companies doing that with any of their troubled properties.
Yeah, I mean, on the good side, I guess the consensus is that it is an improvement, right, from what people got in 2017.
So I think this is like you're going out to a restaurant, right? You order a piece of pie in 2017 and they bring out a moldy piece of pie, right? You're not going to eat that. You don't really want it. Well, now in 2020, you go to the same restaurant, you do the same order, they bring you a piece of pie, but this time it's microwaved. It's still got mold on it. It's the same piece of pie. It's just slightly warmer. So it's not really good. It's just somewhat better. Like it didn't really have a very high bar to leap over. So I did enjoy a lot of this movie. I do think it is one of the stronger entries in the DCEU. And I think, a couple years down the line, if I ever revisit them again, which I probably will, I'm going to go to this one and not the theatrical cut. But it's not something that I'm like, yeah, this is one of the best comic book movies of all time. This is, topping my 2021 list. This is a movie I feel very lukewarm about. It's just, it exists.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to see it. It's cool that it exists. In any state, it's still a very flawed movie, but it's cool to see Zack Snyder get to, give his vision and really kind of close out that trilogy of the DCEU.
Yep.
So before we move on to the MovieBabble Club, I think that's what we're calling the new segment. Nick had a couple words he wanted me to throw in on the Snyder Cut. So I'm going to cue that audio clip.
This is not a movie, it is a film. Never have I seen such an auteur exercise in the avant-garde. Zack Snyder is clearly the greatest living director, and Justice League is his magnum opus. I would encourage everyone wasting their time on Marvel trash and whining about Martin Scorsese to take in this masterpiece. Never before have I wept when presented with such beauty. This film is a turning point in cinematic history. Decades from now we will only recognize cinema before Zack Snyder's Justice League and cinema after Zack Snyder's Justice League. This is not just my Black Panther, this is my soul embodied by the frame.
I think Nick was spot on. Those are some really wise words that he just dropped. Really puts.
Yeah, I feel like I don't have to. I feel like I don't even have to watch it now. I mean, I hear those words, and that's all I have to know about this thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I can even say anything as eloquent about our next topic, yeah. So for the MovieBabble Club, is I guess what we're calling it. We're each picking a movie each week. All two of us or three of us are watching it, and then talking about it. So these are movies that none of us have seen before. In the case of all three of these movies, including the one I picked a couple weeks ago, I'd never heard of any of them before. So it's been a really good blind watch. And now that we've done a full rotation, it's really interesting to just see the different kinds of stuff we're gravitating towards. I don't know about you.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't know if we have a title yet. I mean, I like it's funny. I think Nick's been liking that we are kind of throwing different names around every week for this. I think last week I called it book club, but with a movie or something like that.
I think I pitched shared cinema at some point, but it sounds kind of snooty. The further away I get from the pitch, the less I like it. So
I like that. It's good. Yeah, you're right. I think we're a full rotation through now. Everyone's put in at least one. So this was my week. Yeah, I do like the difference in what we've seen so far. We've seen movies now. I think each one is approximately 20 years apart, which is kind of cool. I think 50s, 70s, almost 90s. I'm a little off with the numbers there, but they're it's relatively close. So yeah, this week I picked a Studio Ghibli movie called The Grave of the Firefly. So this film came out in 1988. You have a good director here in Isao Takahata, who is a director who has had a very successful career. This is one of his bigger movies, I would say. He's done a lot of movies there. But this is one of his bigger ones. I know he got nominated for an Oscar in 2013 for The Tale of Princess Kaguya. So that's another very popular anime film. And that's the last movie he actually directed. So yeah, he's been successful. He passed away in 2018, but he lived a very successful life, great career. So I picked this movie really just because I was looking at some of their films. Very popular studio over there in Japan, very popular anime studio. And this is one of the ones that kind of popped out to me, and I just kind of wanted to check it out. It had some good reviews, stuff like that. It's a heavy movie though. It is. Kind of before we dive into it a little, what's your kind of first take on this film?
So I went in completely blind, with the exception of like the one sentence synopsis that Hulu provides, which I think gives you enough info to be like, here's a basic premise, but really lets you discover most of the movie without really knowing what's going to happen. But I had a really strong reaction to this. Just the end of this movie, and I'm sure we'll dive into it a little bit. It's just a real gut punch, and it's beautifully acted, beautifully written. It's very heartfelt, just focusing on this really intimate sibling relationship. And man, I was just moved. That's probably the grandest way I can put it. It just struck me as a person.
No, certainly. It's a tough movie. So essentially it's a World War II kind of tragedy type movie. And it just kind of follows two children in Japan. One seems to be, I'd say, a teenage boy, the other one a younger girl, maybe. And they're just, as you watch through the film, I mean, constantly there's air raids, right? Bombs are going down. It's World War II in Japan, and they are kind of on the move. You kind of see them throughout the movie, place to place. The situation gets worse. It progressively gets worse. They start in their kind of village, their mother's there, stuff like that. The air raids come, and just constantly they have to find new shelter, and just things continually get worse for them. And it's sad to watch this movie, but I think the relationship, as you said, between those two characters there, the two siblings. I think it is beautiful to watch. Um, it's heartfelt for sure, and it does lead up to that ending that is pretty tough. But yeah, I found this movie to be, so it's a very humanistic look at war, right? Like it's kind of it wants to show you the effects of war, but really not show you the war part of it. I mean, you see the bombs come down, you see the air raids, but it really is about these two siblings and about what they go through. And I think that's very special and unique. But yeah, so how did you find, I guess I'll say, just kind of that progression, kind of from the start where they were in this movie to where they get to in the end? How did you find watching that?
I really like that this movie starts off very sobering. So death is always, that stench of death is always just hanging around every corner in this movie. But they start off with the death of the main character. It's the first scene, and it really grounds you into what this is going to be. But I really like it because although it starts off on this very sobering, very final note, it then lightens up as we start to go forward. So even when there's bombings going on and starvation going on, it's this very sweet movie at its core of the love between a brother and his little sister, who he's basically having to be the surrogate parent for. And it never loses sight of that. So that relationship really maintains it um, the entire movie, and it draws you in first of all, and it also keeps you invested and makes just kind of the final punches when you see, okay, this is how we get to where we started from. And just as like you said, we're watching war unfold, but we're not watching soldiers, right? Nobody's firing guns
Hmm.
or storming beaches. We're watching what happens to the people adjacent to war, who are kind of picking up the slack of daily life while everybody's fighting. And I think it says some really beautiful things, but it also says some really harrowing things. And just it is very much a tragedy, and it never lets you forget that.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think I mean, looking at the beginning of the movie when they really do kind of unveil the ending and then show you how they get there after that, I think it was right to do that. I think it'd be too much of a punch if they didn't do that. Like I think they really had to. Um, but yeah, you're right. And you know what? This movie is very universal in my opinion. I think it's one that can be applied to so many different people because war is everywhere. Even today, bombs are dropped in many countries. So I do think it is a movie that will always stay relevant. Personally, I think people will experience this forever, sadly, and it is something that I do find to be very universal. It was an interesting blind watch, though. I mean, I for me even like I was just looking at movies from the studio that I did want to check out at some point, and um, it's not one that I knew really anything about. I knew that it was supposedly sad and really good. That's all I knew. And then we watch it. I mean, that's what you get. But it is beautiful. It was good, and I'm glad we checked it out for sure.
Yeah. So did you do the dubbed or the subtitled version of this
Yeah.
movie?
So I will get a bit of hate for this, I think. So I never do dub because I just don't. I like the authentic version, but I had no way to find that, so I had to do the dub.
Oh,
Very sad, very sad. So I'm just very against dubbing. I think it's. I mean, you just read the subtitles. It's very normal. It's very authentic. But sadly, I don't have access to that. I know you watched on Hulu, as you said, which has you said options for both.
yeah. So I went with subtitled, and I think I don't know. I don't think there's a perfect watch if you're watching a movie in a different language, because either way you're going to be a little bit distracted. So I would honestly like to check out the dubbed version at some point, just because then yeah you'll be a little bit more audibly distracted, but visually you're not having to read anything. You can really just take in the frame, and I think that's even more important in an animated movie, because everything is much more intentional. There's nothing happens that isn't directly designed to happen or intended to happen.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment as well. It's just it was too bad because I did recommend it, wanting to watch the just authentic, just subtitled version, and then when I got on to purchase the rental there, it only had the option for the dub. I'm like, oh no, but it is what it is, and it was still obviously very enjoyable. I don't think it would hinder my experience at all. I think it was still a great watch and a worthy one as well. One that I'll remember. Very good film though. It's pretty short as well. It's less than 90 minutes. I think it's 88, 89 minutes. So it's certainly one that everyone can check out. And for me, I mean, this is a studio that everyone compares to Pixar as kind of like Japan's offering, or kind of like the other animated studio in the world that rivals Pixar. For me, this is an area where Pixar, I think, would never go. Like, this is a very deep movie. It's very heavy, and I've watched some of their other movies, and they're not quite like this. I think they're willing to be, as a studio, a little bit darker with their subject matter than Pixar has been. But I do appreciate an animated film that does go these lengths.
Yeah, and I think the real difference is that Pixar will take its characters to a dark place fairly often, but it doesn't really take the world to a dark place quite like this movie does. And so Grave of the Fireflies has these two pretty pure, lighthearted characters for the most part that are just immersed in this dark and frankly cruel world. And so you have these two innocents trying to grapple with a lot of people that are just so abused by the war that they don't really care anymore. And people that do care and don't really have the resources to do anything with it, and people that are just so used to tragedy that it's just an average day for them. And so it's those elements that I think their refusal to kind of hold back on are really what makes this movie work. Whereas, if you try to do this with an American studio, particularly like the big ones like Pixar, I don't think you would go that far with it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do agree. One thing I find interesting about just watching movies blindly is checking out afterwards how big of an impact they've left. So I did that right away, and this movie was pretty big. I mean, it's made a big impact. I know. I'm just kind of looking at lists that it's landed on, and there are several people that rank it as like several big, like Empire here magazine. They rank it as one of the best war films of all time. World War II movie, it's up there on a lot of lists. It's one of the better movies of all time. Roger Ebert put it on one of his greatest films of all time list. So I didn't know that, but it has made quite the impact, and it is pretty popular. So I think that's it's interesting to know. I mean, it's always fun just when you blindly watch a movie to afterwards see this movie's story outside of the film, just kind of see how it had its impact on people and on society. I think that's always a fun aspect of this, what we're doing here with MovieBabble.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I'm glad you recommended, because this isn't something that I would have really probably been exposed to independently. So even if you didn't come into it with a huge connection to it, you still opened the cinema door, so to say. And so I'm really glad, because it's definitely got me more interested in checking out more of Ghibli's older work. I were talking about this before we got on, but I've seen a little bit of their more recent, by recent I mean within the last 20 years, work, but really just diving into not current animation, even if it's not Ghibli or not Japanese or even not American, and just being more exploratory in that sense.
Mm-hmm. No, certainly, it's always important. I mean, I think that's one of the great things we're doing here now with this weekly addition to the podcast. It's going to be fun, and I think you're next week, right?
Yeah, I still haven't decided what I want to pick. Maybe I'm always going to hold Killer Bean Forever is kind of my threat card, and then, when you least expect it, I'm just going to drop it. But yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm excited to pick something. Continue seeing just kind of what all stuff we get into movie wise. I'm sure we'll all pull out some good ones. We have yet to get a bad movie, which I think is good. We made the first round without anything that was just kind of cringy, but I'm sure we'll break that at some point. um, but I'm excited for it. And this has been a good week for movies. We got Nobody coming out this next week with
Oh
Bob
yeah.
Odenkirk. We've got Godzilla versus Kong the week after that. Mortal Kombat's not too far behind. Like, we're getting into some big punching movies, and I am excited.
Yeah, and I mean, you got now theaters in the US are slowly coming too. I mean, it looks like 2,300 or so were open this weekend at some capacity at least. So I mean, we're slowly getting there, and you see the virus numbers are going down in the US as well. So I mean, things might be looking good for the summer.
Yeah, I think Black Widow might actually stay firm on that release date at this point.
Yeah, I think so too. I think we'll see. We'll see how the first 2 weeks of April goes. Maybe see how Kong v Godzilla goes. But yeah, I'd agree. I think they will probably stick to that early May slot. I'm pretty excited to see what happens.
Yeah, me too. And with all that stuff coming out, we'll be here talking about it. So this has been myself, Colin, and Brennan. This has been this week's episode of the MovieBabble Podcast. And we'll be back next week talking about Nobody, talking about whatever I recommend. We'll figure that out hopefully this evening. But remember, you can always check us out online at moviebabble.com.